GT3. To compete in sanctioned racing events, manufacturers have to produce a number of street-legal race cars or homologation specials to meet the racing requirements. This process has given us cars like the CLK GTR Strassen version with its M297 AMG V12 and the BMW E30 M3, which was built purely to compete in the German DTM racing series. Porsche, however, would literally pit the racing class designation as a badge on the homologation special, and that's how we get the 911 GT3. The GT3 since 1999 has exclusively used naturally aspirated high revving flat six engines to absolutely destroy and decimate track records around the world and belt out one of the most beautiful exhaust notes of all time. Today on Explain, we will take a deep dive into the heart of the GT3, which is one of my favorite cars to ever exist. The 911 GT3 can trace its ancestral roots back to Ferdinand Piëch's brainchild, the 1973 Carrera RS, where the Carrera nameplate was an ode to Porsche's victories in the 1950s in the Carrera Panamericana races in Mexico, which are arguably the most dangerous racing series ever. The RS, however, stood for Rennsport or racing sport, and it lived up to the name with its lightweight thin steel body, fiberglass bumpers and bonnet, and thinner glass to save weight. Under the bonnet was a hot-rodded version of the 911S's 2.4-liter air-cooled flat-six engine. The cylinders were bored out to 90 millimeters, but maintained integrity by using a nickel silicon carbide coating used on the 917 prototype race car. The cylinder heads and camshafts remained a carryover from the 911S, even maintaining the 8.5-to-1 compression ratio, making the power increase solely built on the bored-out configuration. The 210 horsepower output, combined with a sub 1,000 kilogram chassis, gave the Carrera RS a 5.8 second 0 to 60 and a 150 mile per hour top speed, which made it the fastest 911 ever produced at the time. The racing version, the RSR, would absolutely dominate the 1973 and 1974 FIA GT Cup. The Carrera RS nameplate would resurface many times in air-cooled configuration like the 964 Carrera RS and the 993 Carrera RS Club Sport, but the next generation of lightweight high-revving track monsters from Stuttgart would be water-cooled and use the name GT3. In 1999, Porsche introduced their homologation special, the 996 GT3, which was built on the stiffer Carrera 4S chassis. The GT3 would boast a special power plant, the Metzger M96.76 engine, which was derived from the Le Mans winning GT1 race car with the absence of turbochargers. The lightweight forged crankshaft, titanium connecting rods, and lightweight aluminum pistons are bespoke to the GT3 variant not found in the Metzger engines in the 996 Turbo and the GT2. The GT3 had much more aggressive camshafts compared to the standard Carrera, and displacement bumped to 3.6 liters with an 11.7-to-1 compression ratio. The GT3 still had air-cooled DNA since it shared the 964 crankcase, and Le Mans DNA since it used the dry sump Metzger engine, and total output was 360 brake horsepower, giving the GT3 100 horsepower per liter. The GT3 could sprint from 0 to 62 miles per hour in 4.8 seconds and a top speed of 188 miles per hour. In 2003, the GT3 was facelifted, which is what we know as the 996.2. More than just a sharper front end with a redesigned spoiler, it was the engine that also got to be tinkered with. The M96.79 3.6-liter Metzger redline was raised to 8,200 RPM. The internals also went on a diet, giving a more rev-happy nature, and power increased by 21 brake horsepower up to 381. If you wanted an even more track-focused model, the GT3 RS could be had. This differed by adding a carbon fiber hood and wing, a lightweight polycarbonate rear window, carbon ceramic brakes, and a ported cylinder head for the 3.6-liter Metzger, which dyno testing has shown to be over 410 horsepower on average. In 2006, the GT3 would return, but on the newer 997 Carrera wide-body chassis, making it 60 millimeters wider than the 996 GT3. The 997 was more aerodynamically proficient and featured the signature center exit exhaust that will become a staple on GT3 models even to today. The Metzger 3.6 engine was carried over, but even further modified with a variable intake plenum, which has valves that are programmed to open and close throughout the RPM range in order to maximize torque. The throttle body increased from 76 to 82 millimeters. The intake valve lift increased from 12.3 to 12.7 millimeters. The compression ratio was even bumped from 11.7 to 12.0 to 1 with the help of newly designed forged lightweight pistons. Power bumped to 415 brake horsepower, which was now 115 horsepower per liter, and redline increased to 8,400 RPM. 8 months later, the RS variant would debut with an even wider rear track, carbon fiber wing, and a polycarbonate rear window, and a single mass flywheel versus the dual mass flywheel in the standard GT3. The 44-pound weight savings gave it an even faster 0 to 60 with the same 190 mph top speed. In 2009, you saw the introduction of the 997.2 facelifted GT3. This introduced the Porsche Centerlock wheels standard and still are a staple on GT3s even today. The 3.6-liter Metzger was then reworked even more and bored out 2.6 millimeters to 3.8 liters, which is proudly shown on the 997.2 spoiler. The exhaust camshafts now featured variable cams, so you have variable valve timing on the intake and exhaust camshafts. The redline bumped up 100 RPM to 8,500 RPM, and output increased to 435 brake horsepower. On the RS variant, the variable intake manifold has larger intake tubes with twin air filter housings, and combined with a lighter flywheel where horsepower bumped 15 horsepower up to 450 brake horsepower. In typical Porsche fashion, they keep developing an already amazing power plant, and then in 2011 released a 4-liter Metzger engine in the GT3 RS 4.0. This was a stroke 3.8 using the GT3 RSR race car's crankshaft and redesigned pistons that bumped compression up to 12.6 to 1, which blurred the line between street car and race car. The output rose to 500 brake horsepower with a staggering 123 horsepower per liter, which even today is unheard of in naturally aspirated engines. In 2013, the GT3 re-emerged with the new 991 architecture, which was even wider and significantly stiffer than the 997 GT3, while even weighing 40 kilograms less, making it the lightest GT3 since the original 996.1. Gone was the legendary Metzger and replaced with a direct-injected 3.8-liter flat six based on the Carrera S MA1 engine architecture. The GT3 used a bespoke lightweight forged steel crankshaft with titanium connecting rods and forged aluminum pistons, which helped give it a 9,000 RPM redline and compression bumped all the way up to 12.9 to 1 with the help of direct injection. The 991 would add even more technological advancement like rear wheel steering up to 1.5 degrees for better low speed maneuverability and high speed stability, while also introducing the PDK 7-speed dual clutch transmission as the only option, which was met with a lot of controversy. To add fuel to the fire, the early 991 GT3s randomly could have catastrophic engine failure resulting in a fire due to the connecting rod bolts breaking under high tensile loads and puncturing the engine block, spilling oil into the exhaust. This was remedied quickly by Porsche recalling all 785 991 GT3s to get brand new engines with updated internals. 2 years later, the RS model would debut with distinct styling cues like the fins on the fenders, the intakes on the rear quarters, and the return of the 4-liter engine displacement. This took the 3.8-liter engine and stroked up by 4 millimeters to 81.5 millimeters, and the crankshaft is made out of high-purity tempered steel with lightweight pistons and titanium connecting rods with modified camshafts and upgraded valve springs to handle the 9,000 RPM redline. And it was very closely related to the 911 GT3 Cup engine. With the introduction of the facelifted 991.2, the 3.8-liter engine was completely dropped in 2017, and the GT3 and RS models both received the 4-liter MA1.76 flat 6 engine, with the RS getting the higher output of 520 brake horsepower. The RS gets even more track ready with carbon fiber fenders and hood, with a magnesium roof structure and optional magnesium wheels, saving an additional 25 pounds over the GT3. Even though the 991 GT3 started with a rocky start, it ended in a triumphant finish. In February of 2021, the 992 generation of 911 was bestowed with the GT3 badge. The 992 front track is 63mm wider than the 991.2 GT3, and in the age of more safety and more weight, the 992 only weighs 12 more pounds than the 991.2. The biggest change is the 992 receiving double wishbone suspension, which isn't shared with any of the lower trims of the 992 chassis, only the GT3 receives it. The engine of the 992 GT3 is similar to the 991.2 GT3 RS engine, but with the addition of individual throttle bodies which work in unison with the variable intake to produce over 100% volumetric efficiency, which is like supercharging an engine but without the supercharger. With its astounding 13.3-to-1 compression ratio, the 992 GT3 produces 510 brake horsepower and has broken the 7-minute barrier at the Nürburgring with a 6:55 time. As with all things Porsche, there's still room for improvement, so the 992 GT3 RS was unveiled with the most aggressive aerodynamics ever seen on a Porsche 911, almost similar to the 911 GT3 Cup race car. It features an active spoiler which can actively reduce drag for maximum speed. The 4-liter engine maintains all the goodies from the GT3, but with the addition of higher duration camshafts, which add 15 more horsepower over the GT3, the RS was never meant to be a huge horsepower leap, but more track focused and lighter. Even though the original 996 GT3 was purely a homologation model and never was expected to be as successful and grasp such a cult-like following, in the age of downsizing and adding turbos to make up for the loss of displacement and electric motors, Porsche still keeps the recipe true to what a 911 was and always should be.